Welcome everyone to the Detroit Institute of Art's Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm sorry we're getting started a little bit later than we'd like to today, but thank you so much for joining us. I'm Amanda Harrison-Keithley, a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. Today's program is very special because it's the first time we're offering an in-depth look at self-portraits in the DIA's collection. And we're honored that you are among the first guests to hear this talk. As always, I'd like to encourage you to please ask questions during the presentation. You can do this by selecting the Q&A icon on the right side of your screen. Type your question into the compose box and then select send if you want to ask your question anonymously. Select Ask Anonymously. Questions will be read on screen by Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again later, you can find a link on our Facebook page. Today's program hosts are trained docents Howard Rosenberg and Ray Henney. Howard and Ray are co-vice chairs of the DIA's IPV, or Docent Committee. They both have been trained docents and tour guides for 3 years. Howard also enjoys painting. Please welcome Howard Rosenberg and Ray Henney.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We apologize for that, but we are ready to get started. And today, regardless of whatever your headline said, we are going to be doing a really special treat for you. This is a brand new world premiere presentation of Thursdays at the Museum using self-portraits and identities, and who are we, and how do we recognize ourselves, and how do we think about ourselves, and how do artists think about themselves. So Ray, are you ready to get going?
I am, Howard.
Let's do it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ray Henney, and as Howard was saying, we're going to explore some self-portraits here, and these are more than documenting what the artist happened to look like at the particular time, like maybe a photograph. Each of these self-portraits is trying to capture and communicate something more, something else. So let's begin and see what we can find with our first portrait. This is a wonderful portrait by an Italian artist, Salvador Rosa. He painted this self-portrait in the 1650s, and he was a really extremely talented Italian painter. He spent most of his career in Rome, and he had many significant commissions to do paintings from the Roman Catholic Church and also wealthy patrons. He did this particular self-portrait when he was about, in his 40s, in his early 40s. So Howard, look at how dramatic this is. You've got this lighting, this moody background, and then you've got this darkness. And Howard, it's been a long time since we could look in the mirror and see that kind of head of hair. You know, Howard, it's been a long time. So you've got this dark hair, wonderful hair, and then you've got the light just shining down in half his face. He's not looking toward us, showing him, being transparent. He's just turning and just showing half his face. And you've got this pointy nose, and you've got this these eyebrows, and this kind of long mustache, goatee, beard type things. So you've got this intense look, almost confrontational. So you look at this and you think dark, brooding, mysterious. This wasn't intended to be in an introspective type of self-portrait like you'll be seeing from the others. This one was meant more for publicity. This was about self-promotion. He did several self-portraits in an effort to sort of develop an image or a celebrity in order to gain more commissions. In fact, he would alter his looks a bit depending on what kind of statement he wanted to make for his image. Here he's making the statement of a romantic, mysterious, non-conforming artist. He is one of the first examples in the history of art of an artist trying to market himself with that sort of romantic concept of an artist, rather than just a craftsman which that's how they were known throughout history. And he really thought of himself as an artist because he not only painted, he did prints, he was a satirist, he was a poet, and he was an actor who was heavily involved in theater, which I guess is not surprising once you look at this. He's also known for his, just very dramatic, moving landscapes and historic scenes, scenes of battlefields, or even more common scenes, but scenes of drama like Unruly Bandits. And he influenced an entire, actually generations of English landscape paintings. So this particular painting, Howard, was done at a time that was kind of difficult for Rosa. He had been condemned by the Catholic Church because he was living in sin with a common law wife and children. They weren't married under the church. And because of that, he was required to send them away. Also, Rome at this particular time was experiencing a plague which was ravaging that city. So here's the question. In this portrait, is this intended simply to be a promotion of Rosa as some sort of romantic, dark artist? Or is there something more in this? Is this about his anger and grief and emotion about the circumstances he was suffering? Let's go to the next one. Christine, let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ray.
This is a wonderful portrait that's in our American gallery by an American artist named Rembrandt Peale from 1828. Rembrandt Peale was a member of the famous Peale family of artists. His father, Charles, and Charles's brother, James, were famous artists, and they raised children to be artists. And in fact, Charles named obviously Rembrandt after a famous artist, and he named his other children after famous artists. So he was, there's a lot of parental expectations in that family about what your career choice was going to be. But Rembrandt was the most successful in the family. He was really known for his portraits, and the DIA has a majestic portrait of George Washington done by Peale. Just is remarkable. He's also known at the DIA for doing the largest painting that the DIA owns, which is hanging now. It's called The Court of Death. And if you visited the American wing of the DIA, it's something that's hard to miss. It's an extremely large painting.
Right, we keep promising people that we're going to show them that, and so far we haven't. All we do is talk about it. It's sort of unfair of us. One day we should get to a Court of Death exhibition. What do you think?
You know what, Howard? Imagine the anticipation when we finally get to do that.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's pretty exciting.
So, Howard, unlike Salvador Rosa, who only turns to us and shows half his face, this is a classical view of a portrait, looking straight ahead at us with the lighting, more full lighting. In fact, it's really a classic pose. If you think about busts of, marble busts of famous people or people who have influenced history, they have this straight-on look like this and that kind of exaggerated neck. But unlike those, there's more to this painting. First of all, you've got this, his look is somewhat tender. There's kind of a vulnerability in his look. And also, which is very uncharacteristic of the time, is this background. And typically, portraits show something about the person, about their status or about their wealth. There'll be signs of wealth, maybe in the background or in their clothing, or there'll be objects, something that show their status. But here you have, just sort of a background that kind of focuses on him. And notice how fuzzy it becomes in his clothing. It loses all detail. The detail is just here in his face and in that look. There's an inscription in the back that says a lot about this painting. It says, Rembrandt Peale painted himself, Boston, 1828, for his wife, Eleonora Peale. He painted this shortly after his father Charles's death, and before he was going to go to Italy for 2 years. He was 50 years old. All his life he had wanted to study in Italy, and his father Charles, who was a Puritan, thought it was nonsense and frivolous for him to study in Europe. Really discouraged him from doing that. So now he was going to Italy. So the question is about this: what is he communicating? Is this intended to be a tender portrait for his wife? Is it intended to show the vulnerability he felt for leaving his family? Is it intended to communicate, his own sense of how he perceived himself, or maybe even how he wanted prosperity to perceive him? Howard?
Ray, you know what? I just love the way he rendered his eyeglasses and the shadows of his eyeglasses. I mean, just the detail and the patience that he took. So before we go on to the next piece, I thought that we would tell our viewers how we decided in what order we were going to put these paintings. We talked about a lot of different ways, put them in genres, put them in styles, put them in different ways, put them in groups, and we settled on putting them in chronological order. So the Salvador Rosa was the earliest painting. This was the next painting done in 1828. The Salvador Rosa was done in 1650 or so. Our next painting, oops, what's this one, Ray?
Howard, I think I've seen that particular painting once or twice before.
I believe we all have. So this is our self-portrait of Vincent Van Gogh. And as our European curator, Jill Shaw, will tell you, Ralph Booth purchased this on behalf of the Arts Commission in around 1922. It was the first, Ray, Van Gogh to appear in a, it was the first, Ray, are you making noise? It was the first.
You know me, Howard, I can't sit still.
I'm like trying to upstage me there, buddy. It was the first Van Gogh to appear in an American museum, Ray. You know that. But here's the thing. You talked about Salvador Rosa. You talked about Rembrandt really nicely, and you gave us both reasons why they were painted. Rosa painted it for publicity. Rembrandt Peale painted it for his wife on his trip to Italy. Why did Van Gogh paint a self-portrait? What was he thinking? Well, maybe he was thinking that he didn't have any money to pay models to that could sit for him. He needed the kindness of stranger, like the postman Roulan. He didn't have any money. His brother Theo helped support him. He loved to paint. He enjoyed. I mean, that was what his life was, and the only person that would sit for him comfortably and quietly was himself. He did, I believe, Ray, correct me on this, around 30 or so self-portraits.
That's exactly right, Howard.
Thank you, Ray. Just because he didn't have anybody else to paint, he didn't sell any of his paintings in his lifetime, except for maybe one. And this is such a completely different painting. Look at the brushstrokes. Look at the intensity. Look at the colors he used. He loved yellow ochre. He loved bright, brilliant, intense, high energy brushstrokes. He was putting his emotion into the painting, his expression of his feeling, and he wanted you to feel that expression, Ray. So this is the beginning of post-impressionism, or expressionism, as art historians call it. And you know what? If it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd be having a Van Gogh exhibition starting really soon. But it's been delayed, and it's on, and it's scheduled for October in 2022, and it's going to run to January 2023. And Jill Shaw is curating that, and she's going to have 75 pieces. Not all of them are Van Goghs, but many of them are original Van Goghs, and I'm just so excited about looking at that. So I think that's the reason Van Gogh painted that, and let's have a look. Well, Christine, are there any questions up till now?
No, we're good, Howard.
Thanks. So here's Van Gogh, Ray. This is him about 15 years earlier. He looks just kind of like a regular guy. Nice suit, nice tie. You know, he looks a little like you, buddy. Oh, who's this, Ray?
Oh, Howard, this is Otto Dix's self-portrait done in 1912. This is the early work of this artist. He was only 21 years old, but he's been identified with the German expressionist. And you'll notice this appearance you've got here, Howard. You've got this really stern, upright look, and you've got, you know, this sort of kind of looking forward, but not quite looking forward, and you've got this carnation. This has wonderful detail, and when you have a chance, when the visitors have a chance to come to the museum and see this, this is displayed in our German Expressionist gallery. The DIA has one of the best collections of German Expressionism outside of Germany. It is a world-class collection, and I very much encourage you to visit that room. And in that room, this really stands out because there is an enamel-like glossiness to this that really enhances a wonderful detail that Otto does with the texture of this sort of corduroy jacket, these hands. Look at these hands. Just amazing detail, the way the carnation is, and also the skin tones. Notice the smoothness, but how the colors fade the way they do in nature. He is really renowned and praised for his technical ability. Now this pose with this flower, he's intending, Howard, to evoke, or suggest the 16th century German art with this pose and with this technical execution. And what I mean by that, and let me explain, the technical execution is really an older execution that was done in medieval times in Northern European. And it's using oil and tempera on wood. And the way they did that, and to make the sort of enamel-like quality, is they would glaze the wood, with this enamel, and then would use tempera, which is paint that was used by artists before oil painting, which I understand is more difficult. It's much more ornery to use, and he built up layers to make this wonderful detail. So that's the traditional method that he was using to reference, 15th and 16th century German art. But then he has this traditional pose, and this traditional pose was used in Northern European many times, and the DIA happens to have a painting that has that pose in its collection. And here it is, Howard. This is by Michael Logan Moat, and he was a German artist. He did this in 1486. It's called A Young Man, and you can see the similarities. The carnations, a red carnation in the older painting, and in Otto's painting, it's more of a pink, red, white carnation. And then you have, kind of a profile, but not a profile, and that stern look. So this particular painting, A Young Man, is in the late medieval German style also. Again, it's not a direct example of what Otto was looking at when he painted it, but there were many paintings. This was a very typical type of painting. And the carnation is a traditional symbol in Northern European at the time that A Young Man was done. It was a symbol of engagement or being married. Brides, the tradition was that brides would hide a carnation from the groom or the soon-to-be groom, and he would have to find it. So it was meant to, signal engagement or marriage. Now, Dix uses this as a reference to that, earlier painting, but he was neither engaged nor married at that particular time. And there's this difference here that's intriguing, Howard. If you look at the traditional painting here, A Young Man, the look is rather stoic. It's not really an emotion. It's kind of a stoic, distant-looking gaze. But Otto here, Otto Dix, really paints himself with a very assertive, a challenging gaze. It's like a psychological component, that you're not seeing in the example. So, what is Otto Dix challenging in in this portrait? Is he challenging German traditional art? Is he challenging German culture? Or is he challenging something or someone else? Howard?
Well, I'm challenging you to move on to the next painting.
Well, that's fine. But before we do that, we have to show Otto Dix, a photo of him some 20 years later. And you know what, Howard? In all that time, he didn't look any happier, does he? In fact, Howard, he kind of reminds me of how you look when your wife says you can't have any more dessert.
He looks like a movie star to me, Ray.
Howard, you want to go to the next painting?
I would love to, Ray.
Sure.
This is a wonderful portrait. And it's interesting because photographs can be portraits, can't they, Ray?
You bet.
So this is Ilse Bing. Ilse Bing was called the Queen of the Leicas. Ilse was a German Jew. In 1929, the Leica was invented. It was revealed. It was the first 35 millimeter camera. It was a handheld camera that was able to take sharp images. And Ilse, because she was coming from an affluent family, was able to purchase that. And she began to work with it. But being from an affluent family, she was expected to go on to college, to have a profession, or to get married, to have a family. But instead, Ray, she chose to take the camera and make a career out of it. It was to her family's horror and to our enjoyment, because she created some brilliant photographs, and she was a leading fashion photographer, leading avant-garde photographer, leading innovator in photography. She did new things in the darkroom. She did new things when she was taking cameras, when she was taking pictures. She worked for Harper's Bazaar. She did avant-garde work. She photographed whatever she could think of. You know, you see photographs of leaves and trees or close-ups of iron gates. She developed all that. Now, what are you looking at? You're looking at her, looking at the camera, taking a picture of her reflecting into the side of a mirror. So you're seeing lots of aspects of her. And I want to read you something that she wrote that was a quote from her in the Smithsonian. It said, "I felt that the camera grew an extension of my eyes and moved with me. We wanted to show what the camera could do that no brush could do, so we broke every rule. We photographed into the light, even photographed the light, used distorted perspective, and showed movement as a blur." So her identity, Ray, her identity is the camera. And she was a wonderful photographer. She was born in Germany, but what happened was she moved to America. She went back to Germany in the late 30s to marry another photographer. They got caught up in the Nazi Holocaust. She was in a French camp for a year until Harper's Bazaar was able to free her up, and they got her back to America. She spent the rest of her life photographing and working in America. Ray, she was born in 1898 or 1899, and she died in 1998. She was 99 years old.
God bless her.
I swear. In 1959, Ray, she gave up photography, and she was 60 years old, and she started writing poetry, and she called her poems snapshots of words. So she was, you know, kind of multi-purposed her life. Anyway, I think we're going to go on to the next piece, unless Christine, have we gotten any questions?
Yeah, Howard, is this photograph in the collection of the DIA?
It is. This is one of our photographs. We have this in our collection.
And do you know if other museums collect her work?
I am sure that other museums collect her work, although can I say authoritatively, no, I don't know for sure, but it would shock me if they didn't. She's a very well-known, she's part of the canon of early photographers, so they absolutely have to collect her work also.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ray, look at this. This.
Howard, what am I looking at?
You're looking at a self-portrait, Ray. So what have we seen before? We saw really an intense photo of Salvador Rosa. We saw just a photorealistic, gorgeous self-portrait of Rembrandt Peale. We saw the Van Gogh. We saw Ilsa Bing. Now you're looking at, what are you looking at this crazy thing here? So let's take it apart and talk about it. Juan Moreau was a Spanish surrealist painter. Surrealists like to paint things from the unconscious mind. They believe that the dreamlike state or the childlike state was the most truthful state of all. And so they created childlike paintings. And while this is sort of a childlike painting, it's really very sophisticated. So Moreau painted a more realistic painting of himself. In fact, let's have a look at Moreau. There he is. He's kind of cute, isn't he, Ray? And he's looking at, I'm not quite sure what that is, but that's one of his pieces. And so he paints a more realistic painting of himself, and he calls it Self-Portrait 1. And then he takes this one and he makes it Self-Portrait 2. So how do artists see themselves? Well, Moreau saw himself as these two big eyes, right? These are two big eyes. And then the rest of these symbols are symbols that are meaningful to him. The colors are meaningful to him. But really, Ray, we have no idea what those colors are. We do know that the black background is a nod to the Spanish artists that came before him that would use a lot of dark backgrounds as their painting. So it was a nod to Spanish art, but that's about all we know. So Ray, I ask you this question. If you're going to paint a portrait of yourself, how are you going to do it? How are you going to represent yourself? I challenge all the people that are listening to us. How would you represent yourself? I know, Christine, one time you told us that when you were touring somebody, a teenager said he would use a pizza. Is that correct?
Absolutely, a pepperoni pizza.
Pepperoni pizza. So you see, you could take, Ray, you could cut out little pieces of the law review and put them into collage. It looks like yourself. That would be interesting, don't you think?
You bet, Howard.
All right, so there's one. Here's a wonderful, I really like this portrait, Ray.
There's a lot to like. First of all, it's very expressive. You were talking about Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Van Gogh was definitely was an influence on Max Beckman and the movement he founded. He was a founder of an early 20th century movement called German Expressionism. And I referred to that a little while ago when we talked about Otto Dix. And it was a movement that was in reaction to the industrialization, the commercialization of society. They were exploring basic human emotions, and they used, a little bit like Van Gogh, they used color and they used shapes to express emotion and evoke thought. You'll notice this is not representational at all. It's not meant to be representational at all. It's meant to use color, use shape to evoke something, to evoke emotion, to show emotion. So he did many self-portraits, Howard, and he did them to sort of explore his inner self. He used colors and his features to illustrate the different emotions he was feeling, the different emotions he wanted to communicate. And here in this portrait, you can see you've got light coming down, but you've got his face really in darkness, in this sort of grim, sad face. He's very plainly dressed. And there's a lack of perspective, Howard. Everything seems flat. In the canvas here is just right. He's right up at it. It's very close. It seems very flat. So he looks like he's physically close to us. The space is pressed. Yet it's kind of even claustrophobic. And he gazes out of from behind the canvas, as if it were some sort of shield. So, you know, that gaze he has, it seems very challenging. But at the same time, it seems sort of distant. You see what I'm saying, Howard? The eyes really don't seem to focus on you. Like the Van Gogh, wherever you were in the room, those eyes followed you. You're uncertain where he's looking. So you've got this challenging look, but this distant look at the same time. So what is this meant to convey, Howard? Is this meant to convey like a strong personality, you know, strong persona, trying to mask really a vulnerability, sort of a strong face forward when he's really feeling weak and vulnerable inside? And then you notice that this canvas is transparent. You can kind of see his shoulder through it. Maybe he hasn't started painting. Maybe it's just the canvas, you know, on the frame. And is he calculating or contemplating what he's going to paint? Is he painting what he's going to look at? Or is he challenging us? Or is there something else, some other deep emotion that he's trying to show us? Howard?
Ray, that's really good, deep looking. I like that. Thank you.
Christine, any questions?
Yes, actually there is. One of the viewers is noticing that many of the artists don't smile in their self-portraits. Can you address that?
That is their effort to communicate something. And with Max Beckman, he's obviously trying to communicate sort of, you know, not a happy emotion, but just the opposite. Max Beckman lived through World War I and World War II. You know, he was a German citizen. He lived through the social and economic upheaval that both of those wars caused, the immense loss of life that both of those wars caused, and of course for his own country, the atrocities that are attributed to him. So he lived through some extremely dramatic, you know, trauma-evoking time. So you know, if you think about his history, you can think about maybe he doesn't want to communicate a smile. In 1945, when he was 61 years old and had lived through all that.
Okay, so this could be an expression of his inward thoughts then?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Anything else?
The medium, is this an oil painting?
Yes. Oil on canvas.
It almost looks like chalk.
Yeah, it does have that appearance, particularly in the slide, but it is oil on canvas.
Thank you.
Howard,
I
can we
think
go to the next slide?
Let's have a look at.
Oh, this is Max Beckman too. Howard, he doesn't look any happier.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know.
He doesn't look any happier at all.
Howard,
you know what, Howard? It reminds me when your wife calls you up from the basement when you're painting to take out the garbage. Don't you look just like that, Howard?
You know, it looks actually a little like my father.
You know what, guys?
Oh, Howard, you're going to start with that again.
Guys, to interrupt for a moment, one of the viewers said that it almost looks in the painting like he has a tear in his eye.
You know what? Go ahead.
You know what? That's a good observation. I
think so too, because is there a vulnerableness he's trying to show? Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure what he's trying to communicate. This is for us, you know, is there a right answer? Not really.
Well, comparing it to his photograph, though, it seems like a reasonable likeness.
You betcha.
And the background, did the German expressionists often have plain backgrounds?
Not necessarily. Again, it depended upon what they're painting. It depended upon the feeling they're trying to evoke. Some of them have landscapes, but they're not necessarily traditional landscapes. There'll be shapes and colors in nature. There'll be shapes and colors of what they're trying to communicate, the emotions they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, Ray, that's right. That's exactly right. A lot of German expressionists felt, and part of their manifesto was there was too much urbanization. Modernity was destroying the world, and you needed to get back to nature. So they would tend to paint nature scenes.
Did that send them on a choices of colors they chose as well?
Colors were extremely important to German expressionists because colors evoked emotion, colors evoked sense memories, colors told you how they were feeling, and they wanted you to feel a certain way. So colors were the means of expressing their feeling. Form wasn't as important as emotion as color was.
Thank you.
Speaking of color, speaking of emotion, thank you, Christine, for leading us into our next slide. That it couldn't have been more. Look at this, Ray. I mean, you're talking about expressionism. You're talking about feeling. You're talking about a self-portrait. This is a distillation of almost everything we're seeing. Let's look at the artist. There's the artist. Buford Delaney was an African-American painter during the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance, in one brief sentence, was when artists, writers, musicians, creative people used their talents to express who they were in order to counter the white supremacy notion that blacks were inferior to whites. And so here is Buford Delaney expressing who he is. And who is he? He's an artist, he's an African American, and he's gay. And he struggled with his sexuality, and he struggled with his mental health throughout his life. And he adored Van Gogh. So doesn't this kind of look like evokes the Van Gogh image? Look at it closely. You can see the thickness of the paint. You can see how he loved Van Gogh's yellows and ochres. And what do yellows and ochres represent? Yellow is the color of the sun. And isn't the sun something that is bright and is healing and causes you to feel redeemed or accepted? And Buford needed all the healing, all the redemption, all the acceptance that he could get. He was in Paris for a long time. He was befriended by James Baldwin, who wrote a lot of work on civil rights and what it means to be an African American today. And so Buford is one of my favorite artists. He's done some gorgeous pieces. He had some nice pieces in Detroit Collects. And if this is not the most expressive painting that we've seen so far, I don't know what is. I think this is just so lovely. Look at how he has created his own image himself. And, you know, it seems to me I would have liked to have known him and spoken with him. Christine? Yeah.
What is Detroit Collects?
Oh, thank you for asking. So Detroit Collects was a terrific collection of over 60 paintings of African-American artists by Detroit collectors. Not all Detroit collectors were African-American. They were collectors, they were Detroiters and suburbanites who were collectors of African-American art. And one of the paintings that Buford Delaney did was reminiscent to me of Van Gogh's Starry Night, and it was a street scene from Brooklyn that I keep picturing in my mind over and over, and I would absolutely love to have that. Anything else?
Was that the exhibition that was hung just before we close?
Yes, that was, and it was a wonderful exhibition. And Valerie Mercer, our African-American curator, curated that. It was a fun one. It was well attended. I love touring with it. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So here's another portrait, a lot different than this portrait. And it's interesting to look at the two portraits side by side. Yui Lee Smith is an African-American artist. He was born in 1915 in Florida. He died in 1999 in New Mexico, but he spent a great deal of his life, close to 40 years, in the Detroit area. He went to Wayne State University, College for Creative Study, he has a painting called The Piper in the collection of the Detroit, of the DIA, that he submitted when the DIA was running art contests that he won. He enjoyed very much painting. This is a painting of a very powerful looking man who also is not smiling. And you know, Ray, I'm thinking another reason artists don't smile when they do their self-portraits is because it's hard to do a self-portrait. You know, when you're doing a self-portrait, you're concentrating on what you're looking at and what you're painting, and you're usually painting from life, you're usually looking in a mirror. And so it's hard to smile all the time and paint. So I think that a lot of it is just the situation of doing that. He has got himself looking down, so when you look up at somebody, it tends to make you look up, and the person that you're looking up at is powerful. And Yui Lee Smith needed to feel powerful, as we all do, and so he was representing himself in a position of power. Yui was an only child. He tended to play by himself, and he tended to paint portraits of people by themselves, separated from the world, separated from what he painted. He painted desolate, rundown scenes of urban decay. And he even made a quote that was also from the Smithsonian that said, in my case, aloneness, I think, has stemmed from the fact that I am Black. Unconsciously, it has a lot to do with a sense of alienations. So he wanted to articulate his place in the social hierarchy, but ultimately he won a great deal of acclaim and success because of his ability to render figures and render emotions. Christine, before we go on to the next piece, are there any questions?
No, there was a suggestion for us as a museum.
Yeah.
People, I have a couple comments that the viewers are really enjoying, that you have married the self-portraits with actual photographs of the painters, and that it would be so nice to see that in the museum as well. So we thank the viewer for that suggestion.
Well, and we thank them, and you know, we have control over this content, and so we will make a suggestion to the viewers. But there is Yui. See, look, there's Yui smiling. He's happy. Artists can be happy. I'm sure Van Gogh had a good laugh or two occasionally. But I think that when you paint a portrait, it's hard to smile.
Oh, Howard.
Andy there, Ray.
This is an iconic painting by an iconic painter, Andy Warhol, self-portrait, 1967, when he was about 40 years old. Howard, this isn't one painting or one piece. It's actually two pieces that the museum typically shows together. In fact, if you go to the museum, if it were open, you'll see that there are ones on top of the other. Warhol was one of the top advertising artists in Addison Avenue, New York, in the early 1960s. And many of the techniques that he used that he used in his art are from advertising. For instance, here, this is silk screen or screen printing is how it's done, and it's done in multiples. In fact, he did 10 of these. He did a series of them for the Expo 67. And DIA hangs them together always because they want to show the multiples or the serialness. And this idea of serial production, the same thing over and over again, is what Warhol is going for. Think of advertising, you know, drilling in the message over and over, or the image. And it's huge. They're very big. They're like a billboard, again, like advertising. So Warhol was one of the leading pop artists, and pop art was a movement that began in the late 1950s. And it was about art exploring popular culture, popular modern culture. And it was exploring our commercial society, our commercial media, our media, and it tried to make everyday things or everyday objects or art into quote unquote high art. So here's Warhol, you know, posing, really posing, kind of like a 1940s matinee idol, you know, kind of the beauty shot, you know, of a movie star. And he's intending to construct an image, you know, an identity as a celebrity with these poses in multiple versions. Howard, not unlike Rosa, who did it, you know, with his oil and canvas, trying to many different self-portraits, trying to create an image. This is done with silkscreen, as I said. It's not a canvas. There's no paintbrushes. They took a black and white picture that Warhol had done of himself, and he instructed the silk screening company to engage, you know, really use color to show the contrasting dark and light. And these colors are pure indulgence by Warhol. So, you know, he's using the mechanical means of production, and that's part of pop art. They're questioning creativity and the concepts of what is high art. So ultimately, Howard, you know, in using this pose and using a commercial screen printing and doing multiples, you know, serial production, what is Warhol trying to communicate in this self-portrait? Is he simply trying to establish himself as a celebrity, you know, with these shots, this boldness, and then more and more, you know, if one is good, more is better? You know, think of how celebrities are made today, either in the media or in social media, you know, outrageousness, boldness, and repetitivity. And then, you know, he's, you know, is he trying to emphasize, you know, sort of the ordinariness in common life? You know, if one thing is good, is one thing as good as the next thing? You know, is really nothing special, is nothing unique? Or is he really, is this more psychological? Is he really trying to show a glimpse of himself here? Is he got this art, you know, showing this outrageous public persona to really mask really an intimate, private person? You know, he has the public image that he has out there, but really is extremely vulnerable and feels very, you know, doesn't feel like that. Those aren't really his emotions. And we've seen that in some of the other self-portraits. Christine, questions?
Yes, there was a question in regard to the overlay of the colors, and the viewer was wondering if you could address that a little bit.
Sure. And I don't know how this particular silk screening was done, but the silk screening process is typically done in plates. And the original stone is used, and Warhol, and they would transpose this photo onto the platform where they're going to apply the layers of color. And typically, it's, you know, the red will go on, and they'll block out the places where the red doesn't go on, and then the blue, and so forth. And then they'll reprint them over and over again. And as I understand it, if they reprint them with the same colors in the same way, they become more and more fuzzy. They lose their sharpness.
Okay, so part of Warhol's blurriness on the edges was intentional then?
Yes, yes. Everything you're seeing is extremely calculated. He was a very gifted artist. And he was, you know, he could easily do representational art. He could have painted himself like a photograph, but yeah, his art to him was something different. It was really an exploration.
So each color was laid individually over multiple, they ran the print through
Right.
multiple times to create a silk screen with layered colors. Is that right?
Exactly, Christine.
Thank you.
So here's a picture that we have, a photo of him in Detroit, Andy Warhol in Detroit in 1985.
What's that background, Ray?
Yeah, you can see the Rembrandt right in the background. And that's the museum owns that particular print. Howard, are you ready for the next one?
Let's see, maybe I might be. Oh, I love this piece. So, Ray. So here we have a really interesting painting. It's called Portrait of a Collagist. A collagist is an artist that uses different materials to create an image. So what does Benny Andrews do? Benny Andrews creates one painting by using various forms of material. Let's look at it closely. Follow my cursor, Ray. See these flowers? That's a separate piece of canvas. See these? That's a separate piece of canvas. See this bird-like thing? That's a separate piece of canvas. This window is a separate piece of canvas. So what did Benny do? He took all those separate pieces of canvas and he painted them, and then he took it to the main canvas and he glued them on. See his face? That's a separate piece of canvas that he painted his face on, and then he glued it to the canvas. And then see, these are rags here. If you were at the museum, this is very tall. This is about 6 or so feet tall. You would see these are actual rags that he glued to the canvas. See these blue jean pants? These blue jean pants are his actual blue jeans. These are actual blue jeans. He took off his blue jeans and he glued them to the canvas. See that shirt, that collar? That's a collar. So when I talk to kids at the museum, Ray, and I say, by the time Benny got done painting this picture, by the time he got done doing this, he was standing in his underwear. This is such a fun picture to talk about because this thing, this palette, the thing that the artist uses to paint, it's got little globs of paint on it.
Hey,
so
Howard.
Yeah, Ray. Yeah.
You know, it's at the same time disturbing, but not unexpected that you would tell children, have them imagine the artist in his underwear. But go ahead.
Well, Ray, they think it's pretty funny. Now, I'm not sure what you're thinking, but they get this image and they love it because we talk to them about how would you paint yourself, just like with the Moreau. So let's look at what Benny actually looked like. This is a great image. Benny is smiling and happy there. But Benny was intense. He was looking at his portrait when he was painting it. Benny was a teacher. He was a civil rights activist. Benny's serious paintings were about segregation and about civil rights and about the suppression of voting rights and about the suppression of young African-American students being able to go to good schools and about various difficult topics that Benny was able to do. But also you see in the background, he talks about collage. He's talking about art. He loved to teach art. And so we love talking about Benny. Benny was a wonderful artist. He's unfortunately not with us anymore, but this is a really great example of a collage, a great example of how an artist thinks about himself, a great example about just talking about identity too. Christine, any questions?
Yes, wasn't he also an advocate for social change in regard to putting women artists in museum collections? Thank you,
Christine, for asking that question. Benny believed in racial equality. He believed that disharmonies were bad for society, and he worked really hard to have women artists of all colors included in museum collections, which it's still lacking today. So good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Ray, what is it?
Howard, this is Jim Paulus. Firefly Portrait of the Artist with a Cosmic Bubble. This is from 1991. It is hung in our contemporary gallery. It's large. It's about 8 feet tall, and it's about more than 6 feet wide. It's made of plastic, magnetic tape, plexiglass, and all kinds of electric components. Paulus was born in 1941 in Detroit, and he's been a lifelong Detroiter. He did this particular self-portrait when he was 50 years old. Howard, you know what's interesting is that Paulus began his career as a paid tour guide at the DIA. And
really?
It exposed him.
Ray, you said he was paid?
He was paid, I know. Howard, you know what, I didn't want to start something, but I'm with you with this, but I should have just said he was a tour guide.
Oh.
In any event, you know, it allowed him to explore the art. And he was really a pioneer in this electronic art, or what they call kinetic art. He was really known for, kind of his zany, surrealistic sculptures, and he's had quite a bit of fame. He's been the subject of a PBS documentary about high art being created here in Detroit. He was also the subject of a 2016 Academy Award-winning film. It was, again, a documentary. It was called Jim Paulus, Electric Sculptor. In June's 1975 Detroit magazine, Paulus was said to have the tinkering genius of Henry Ford combined with the ironic wit of Michel Duchamp. Michel Duchamp was an early 20th century artist who would take everyday objects and turn them into quote-unquote high art. And he's really famous for turning over a male urinal and putting it as a piece of art, which was, quite controversial at the time and really humorous to many people.
And you were about me talking about underwear, Ray. Sure.
Yeah. So here we go. So let's take a look at this. We've got plastic features. We've got this hair that's way out here like this. And we've got, these eyes. This looks like a firefly. And then you've got this cosmic bubble, as he calls it, that looks almost like a thought bubble that's connected to it. And then you have these lights here and here. And so you can see how zany and fun-loving he is in this self-portrait when you look at him. And there's the artist. And can you see this wonderful hair he has? And, the eyeglasses are kind of shown with this red, and you can now make out the beard, right? Just like him. So and I understand he was pretty tall, too.
It's an accurate representation, then, of him, huh?
Yeah. At least it's a fun representation of him.
Yeah.
And a cosmic bubble is in reference to an Islamic pattern that was used in the 12th century for mosaics. It was a pattern of stars in either a hexagon or a circle or some sort of confined space. And it was referencing what they call cosmetology. Cosmetology is the science of the origins of the universe. So that's what that's representing. And what's a lot of fun, Howard, is that I know it's shown with these lights lit up, but when it's quiet, there is no lights or very little lights. And the louder the noise, the more frantic and more lights come out, and all kinds of patterns come out, both in the body and funly here. And it's a wonderful piece for children because they get to stamp and make noise in the museum, and it's perfectly appropriate. So Howard, what is Paulus communicating with this self-portrait? Is he showing his connection with the universe here, with this cosmic bubble and in this technology? Is it showing his fascination, his personal fascination with technology and art? Is he exploring how our thinking is influenced by others? This bubble is, and these lights are very calm when there's no noise. But the louder the noise, the more disruptive his think bubble is, if that's the intended analogy. Just like how we get influenced and our emotions and our thinking can get influenced by what we hear and what people say. Or is this really simply him having fun and just having fun with himself and in a way making fun of himself and self-grandizing himself?
You know, Ray, those same children that I talked about, when we're in front of this and I get them to applaud and clap, and the harder they clap and the more they applaud, the more the lights go.
Right.
So maybe he was looking for applause. I think that, though, we do need to move on, if that's all right.
Yep, absolutely.
Because we're getting close, and we're going to go a little over, but I think if we do the last couple, we can finish this up.
Okay, great. This is Allison Tsar's sculpture. It's a large sculpture, 6 feet tall, that's in our African American gallery. Allison Tsar is an African-American artist. She was a mixed media, typically does sculptures like this. She did this particular work when she was almost 50 years old. She comes from an artistic family. Her mother, Betty, was a famous artist, and her father was an art conservator. He's a conservationist, excuse me, art conservationist. And she, as she does here, she frequently creates these sculptures based upon her own body. So this is really an image of herself, and she covers wood that she carves with a chainsaw. She covers it here with a thin layer of copper skin that she uses, and she uses rusty nails to pound it in, that's in a scar type pattern. It really shows sort of scarring of the body. Then you have these droplets of cast bronze that really cover her skin. And at the base here you have a pattern tin from a used ceiling in an establishment, a food, a bar type of establishment. She liked to use materials like that because it referenced history. It was material that witnessed history. This is a universal pose of grief and suffering. You've got these droplets off her body. So what is she meaning to communicate here, Howard? At 50, almost 50 years old, is she exploring, her own anxieties, her own aging process? Is she experiencing anguish and loss? Or is she communicating with this title, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, her own connection with her family, blood, her hard work, sweat, and her grief, tears? This is the first work she did, Howard, after her father's death, whom she was extremely close with. Is this simply meant to reflect sort of that deep sadness and grief that she was feeling? Again, it's such a universally thought-invoking, emotional-evoking sculpture.
So this piece, Ray, and this next piece, and there's Allison right there.
Yeah.
And this next piece are not necessarily identified as self-portraits, and we've had discussions internally about what a self-portrait is. So while they're not identified as self-portraits, aren't they who the artist is? Look at this piece. We're going to do this piece quickly and then wrap it up. Hundreds of small squares filled with painting of representing things or of things, like a taxi or a Buddha or a Korean moon jar. A Korean moon jar is a representation of a very specific Korean white porcelain piece that's shaped like a moon, that has this milky glaze, and that it's a defining symbol of Korean art. In fact, in Pyeongchang in the Winter Olympics in 2018, the moon jar was used as a cauldron for the Olympic flame. Now, who did this? A Korean artist that lives in New York. His name is Ik Jun Kang. And so isn't this a representation of who he is, Ray? He's Korean, he's an American artist, he's in New York, he's in Korea, and he's representing all the experiences in his life and all the things about him. And what makes up our identity, Ray? Isn't it things that we experience? Isn't that what makes up who we are? So even though he doesn't identify this as a self-portrait, to me, personally, it seems like a self-portrait. So that's it, except I think you got one more.
I do, Howard. Oh, Howard.
Ray.
You did this self-portrait. You did this in 2018, I understand.
I did.
So
How
viewers,
does it look just like you?
Well, let's just look at this painting, shall we, Christine? I mean, this really looks like someone who's disturbed. I mean, someone who's communicating being disturbed. Notice that he did this when he was in his mid-60s, and yet the hair, it doesn't show a sign of gray. And he's got a lot more than he had then. And even his little, his mustache here, his goatee, look at that. He's not as gray as it was, and there's no wrinkles. is this someone who's having trouble with the aging process? Is he deeply disturbed by it?
Hey,
No.
Ray,
And then you have,
Ray.
yes.
Ray,
And-
I just think it's a guy who took off his glasses before he did his self-portrait.
Well, wait a minute though. And then you've got these zany lines on his head. Is that to show how his thoughts are all over the place and why he drives everybody crazy? I'm just asking.
hey, Ray, remember
Yeah.
when Whistler sued John Ruskin?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm just thinking, okay, keep going. Becky. So I'm going to call this, Ray, I'm going to call this a study in crimson and ochre. What do you think?
Oh, whatever you want, Howard.
Terrific. I like it. I like it, Ray. Howard, it's great.
All
Well,
right.
you know what? I will say, and I'm making fun of Howard, the kind that Howard uses the techniques of expression that we've been talking about, color and lines and paint strokes to show something. And it was Howard. Thank you for showing this.
Well, I thank you guys for doing this and putting up with me, because I was very hesitant to like put this up with all those other incredible artists. But what other chance do I have to actually be part of a museum exhibition? You know, so since we're curating our own stuff, whatever.
Good,
Anyway,
good.
we've gone over time.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. That was really a lot of fun. Ray, thank you. Christine, thank you. I enjoyed it so much. Next week and the week after, we have part 1 and part 2 of a very special event. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which is the women's right to vote. Took way too long, but at least it happened. And we have a very special guest coming. Commissioner Marcia Gershenson is going to be with us next week. And we have lots of great art to talk about. So on behalf of Ray Henney and Christine Mark and our whole team, Amanda, Clinton, Kimmy, thank you all. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.